Welcome. From whenever and wherever you join us, you are welcome here to this collaborative worship of the Baja four Unitarian Universalist communities found in Southeast Arizona, with one in Amado, two in Tucson, and a fourth in Sierra Vista. Today, we celebrate Mother's Day, and I want to acknowledge all who nurture. Thank you. And on this particular Mother's Day, I want to give a shout out to one of our Baja 4 ministers, to Reverend Bethany and to her husband Brian, who had a baby this week of Mother's Day 2021. Congratulations to you, Brian and Reverend Bethany, and welcome to the world, Otis Christopher. Blessings to you, Reverend Bethany, on this your first Mother's Day, and blessings to you and Brian as the caregivers you will be every day from now on. On Mother's Day and every day, we should do more than just give cards. I believe we should make our thanks truly count as we support all those who nurture, protecting their beloveds and strengthening their connections to each other. Last year, it was Reverend Bethany who reminded me of one of the very first women who wanted to introduce Mother's Day as a holiday, the Unitarian Julia Ward Howe. And Howe asked that that celebration be for mothers and their children. She made an ask. In her 1870 proclamation, she called for peace. Arise, all women who have hearts. Say firmly, we will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands shall not come to us reeking with carnage for caresses and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. We women of one country will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs. Mother's Day should protect and connect those who nurture and the ones they love. Since February of this year, we've held several worship services exploring the proposed 8th principle of the Unitarian Universalist Association, a principle that would ask us to embrace our roots, our belief in the dignity and the possible salvation of all on this earth by working actively to take apart racism and other oppressions. This principle would invite us to a continual process of reflecting on ourselves, acting, then trying again in new ways once we know better. After reflecting and practicing, we have decided to endorse an action during this worship. It is certainly not the only thing we can do, and it will not be the last. But it is fitting that we support the national bailout, an effort we have been asked to participate in for several years by our blue Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism leaders, to get the many mothers and caregivers who sit in jail, sometimes losing custody of their children for being away so long, disproportionately people of color, because they cannot pay bail. You will hear more throughout this service and find links in the comments below if you want to donate and act. Think about that as I light this chalice, and as you listen and read with me these words of our proposed 8th principle. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions.
I invite you now to join me in our land acknowledgement. We say these words each week as a reminder of all that has happened and all that there is still to do. And we sit together each week with the discomfort of that truth and the possibility of a different future, one we take action together. We acknowledge that this land was stolen from indigenous peoples. In what is now called Southern Arizona, the displacement, genocide, and theft of land occurred in successive waves of colonization by Spain, Mexico, and the United States. This colonization is still happening, and as we have seen in the last year with the building of the border wall, local tribal nations must continue to fight the destruction and misappropriation of their land by America. The Chiricahua, Apache, Pasquayaqui, O'odham, and Opata peoples are the indigenous ancestors of this land and are still our neighbors today. They are each unique in their culture and language, and they are each resilient in their maintenance of traditional life ways while also engaging this shared present and shaping our shared future.
You gotta do when the Spirit says do. You gotta do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you gotta do, oh Lord. You gotta do when the Spirit says do. You gotta sing when the Spirit says sing. You gotta sing when the Spirit says sing. When the Spirit says sing, you gotta sing, oh Lord. You gotta sing when the Spirit says sing. Spirit says sing. Spirit says sing. Spirit says sing. You gotta dance when the Spirit says dance. You gotta dance when the Spirit says dance. When the Spirit says dance, you gotta dance, oh Lord. You gotta dance when the Spirit says dance. You gotta shout when the Spirit says shout. You gotta shout when the Spirit says shout. When the Spirit shouts out, you gotta shout, oh Lord. You gotta shout when the Spirit says shout. Spirit says shout. Spirit says shout. Spirit says shout. Spirit says shout.
Hi friends, today's story is a true story from a person named Starmaine Jackson who was incarcerated in Detroit, Michigan. Now that word incarcerate is a difficult one. It means confinement in prison, jail, or juvenile detention facility. There's another word that we need to know too before we start our story. That word is bail. It is a promise or guarantee, usually in the form of money, that a judge may require somebody to post as a condition of their release from jail and before their trial. Technically, it's to ensure a defendant returns to court for their trial after they're released. Although bail is usually in the form of money, it can take other forms too. And just a quick warning, this story is a difficult one. It doesn't contain danger or violence of any sense, but it might be hard one for us to hear. This is Starmaine Jackson's story. Starmaine Jackson spent a week in the Wayne County Jail because she couldn't come up with $700 to pay her bail. She was arrested after a routine traffic stop, brought to light a 3-year-old warrant for an alleged felony. This was the first time the 24-year-old single mother of 2 had been behind bars. It was also the first time she'd been separated from her daughters, who were just 3 and 5 years old. She appeared before 2 different magistrates on 2 different days, neither of whom allowed her to ask questions. And in just minutes, they sent her bail at $700, failing to ask if she could afford it, which is required by the law. The law also requires that judges and magistrates determine if a person is a danger to the public or a flight risk when determining bail. And they failed to do this. Ms. Jackson did not have an attorney appointed to represent her, which is mandatory when a person cannot afford legal representation. I had questions I wanted to ask, Ms. Jackson said, but I was told not to speak. The $700 bail Ms. Jackson was required to pay to go free was insurmountable to her, as she had a hard time just making ends meet, even under the best of circumstances. Ms. Jackson is a certified nursing assistant and at the time was between jobs. And as a matter of fact, the day she was arrested was the day she was on her way to start a new job. But because of her detention, she could not even call her employer to explain the situation. Ms. Jackson's family turned to a bail bond company who agreed to pay her bail on the condition that Ms. Jackson pay $315, which she still could not afford. As for the $165 a day it costs Wayne County to keep people like Ms. Jackson locked up, Ms. Jackson notes, quote, taxpayers are paying a lot of money to keep people who aren't dangerous in jail with terrible conditions and food that is unfit to eat. While she was locked up, the godmother of Ms. Jackson's children cared for her children. They were kicking and screaming, "I want my mommy," says the godmother. On top of trying to care for 2 traumatized children, Miss Oliver and others repeatedly reached out to family members to attempt to raise money to get Miss Jackson out. But, explains Miss Oliver, because it wasn't the first of the month, no one even had $20 to spare for her bail. It was really a big struggle. Miss Jackson herself understands how people who have never been to jail might have misconceptions about what it's like. Until recently, she herself was one of those people. Before getting locked up, she said, "I thought jail would be organized, food would at least be edible, and the treatment of prisoners decent," says Miss Jackson. I was wrong about all of that. I was treated worse than a dog, and it really was an eye-opening experience. Now, Ms. Jackson's experience is routinely avoided by people who can afford their own bail. So what other misconceptions are there about bail and incarceration? There are quite a lot. Some of them that are relevant to Ms. Jackson's stories. Let's see if you can identify where the falsehood is. Many people believe that most people in jail have been found guilty of a crime. In fact, that's not true. People held on bail are there before their trial, and this trial is to determine whether they're guilty or not. 60% of people held in local jails have not been convicted of a crime. Another inaccuracy is the more bail is set, the more likely you are to appear in court. And this just isn't true. Many studies show that the amount of money attached to a bond does not have any impact on how likely a person is to appear in court for their trial date. It just makes it more difficult for those who have trouble affording it to afford it. Most people who are in jail are there because they are accused of a crime that the judge thinks they are a safety risk. Not so. Most judges, when they assign bail, are not evaluating whether a person is a safety risk or not. They have a set bail that they offer, and a person either can or cannot afford to pay it. And finally, as we heard in Ms. Jackson's story, keeping people in jail before trial is in fact more expensive, sometimes significantly more expensive than other kinds of supervision for them if they're released from jail awaiting trial. Can you think of any other inaccuracies or untruths that we might apply to Ms. Jackson's story?
I will rise with all my daughters, I will rise against my foes, I will rise with all the mothers, I will carry all their woes, I will rise to fight for freedom, I will rise though faced with fears, I will rise against all hatred while my eyes are veiled in tears. I will rise for religious freedom, for a rich diversity. I will rise for all the weary, for each lonely refugee. I will work for all our women who deserve equal pay. I will work for all our children who await a better day. Oh, come with me, rise up hand in hand. Oh, come with me, rise to spread love across this bitter land. I will rise for love and justice that we see a better day. I will rise in peace and service for a world in disarray. I will rise with all my neighbors for all those who cannot stand. I will rise with all our people who have lost a home and land. I will rise to build up bridges for this broken world we see. I will tear down walls between us that divide you and me. Oh, come with me, rise up hand in hand. Oh, come with me, rise to spread love across this bitter land. We will rise.
The proposed eighth principle concludes with these words, that by our actions, we will accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. What are we being asked to dismantle when we say we'll dismantle oppressions in ourselves? And when I listen to the story of Blue and the ongoing effort to end cash bail, alongside other calls to reimagine community safety or policing, even to imagine the end of mass incarceration, I see many places where I could start within myself, but there's one I'd like to focus on as a moment of pause and reflection, if not meditation, today. These efforts ask me to personally dismantle my relationship with punishment. They ask me to dismantle my understanding that punishment makes healing possible. Where did you learn the idea that punishment would lead to healing? This may be a strange thing to bring up on Mother's Day, as each of us have different relationships to the concept of mother. And undoubtedly, your relationship to your own parents or guardians may have something to do with your relationship to punishment. But there is a larger system that we exist in together. The system of state-based caging, which may feel very normal, almost unremarkable to some of us. Now, that larger system we exist in together, the system of state-based caging, could be made strange. What would it take for us to make human caging and punishment strange? Now, when I was a child, I used to look at a word or phrase and kind of start saying it over and over and over again until suddenly the word didn't make sense anymore, almost to the point where you don't even know if you're spelling a word right. I wonder if some of you have done this before. One of my words I would say over and over again until it was a strange word was the word paper. It was a meditation, maybe a silly one, maybe a childlike one that I didn't realize I was doing. It was the meditation of taking something that you take for granted as normal and really looking at it until, strangely, it begins to disintegrate. And the thing you are looking at or saying becomes strange and unfamiliar and unnatural, deconstructing itself before your gaze, making room for something else to happen. Could we do that with punishment? With the idea of a human cage? Join me in a moment of pause and slowness. Let's make a few things in our culture strange together. What would be possible for the human spirit and for our communities if we did not associate punishment with healing? What would be possible for the human spirit and for our communities if we did not associate money with innocence? What would be possible for the human spirit and for our communities if we did not associate one person's safety with another person's suffering? What would be possible?
what would be possible? What would be possible if we did as Reverend Samantha suggests and look more closely at deeply held beliefs to see something in a new way? What if we were to take on our beloved institutions, our churches, and the wider denomination and see that new ways might be possible? Often it takes an event from the outside world breaking into our life to shift our view, such as a more than year-long pandemic, or as in the story Jamili shared with us earlier, when Starmaine Jackson was forced to remain in prison because she couldn't pay $700 worth of bail. It pushed her to change her misconceptions of prison, and it forces us to rethink the cash bail system. For the UUA in 2017, the in-breaking event was the hiring of a Southern regional lead who was a white man, when all other regional leads were white men, and a woman of color had applied. This led to an uproar, a rethinking of hiring practices in the UUA, many resignations, including that of the UUA president himself, Peter Morales. Yet productive questions erupted out of this chaos. And the Unitarian Universalist Commission on Institutional Change formed, met for 3 years, and published last June its report, Widening the Circle of Concern, a report that encourages us to look at many aspects of our denomination in new ways. It looks at our need for deeper theology and revamping structures. It considers governance, which is really about power, and sees that at the local and regional level, our structures can be too informal, perpetuating a club-like mentality of leadership that undercuts diversity. But our overly complex governance system makes change difficult. At the church level, this study discovers that nominating committees can be agents of change, making sure there is representation, not tokenism, but ever-increasing inclusion and diversity. But, the study finds, if there is not enough training in white supremacy and unconscious bias, it can be dangerous for people of color to be brave in white spaces. And when Black, Indigenous people of color are ministers and speak up, they often lose their jobs. The UUA has a bad history of supporting groups that empower youth and ministers of color and then disbanding them or ending their funding. There are so many ways we can change. Often, the study breaks in with stories that makes this all real. 1,100 people submitted written or oral interviews, and often they described how their worldview had been turned upside down. One minister discovered that her church in Needham, Massachusetts, was probably built and certainly sustained by a slave owned by the minister himself in the 18th century. What hidden stories do we need to uncover? What new ways of seeing do we need to embrace? How can widening the circle of concern help us look through the lens of the proposed 8th principle to dismantle racism in our churches and our denomination? And how can we act? The study holds so many suggestions, but how do we act now? Let us listen to brave Black, Indigenous people of color who still love and have not given up on this difficult denomination, for whom the 8th principle is not an afterthought, but a necessity, for whom ending white supremacy is a question of survival. Leaders who bring us to bailouts and push us to be brave within our own churches. Julica Herman de la Fuente speaks of holy interruption, That moment when we hear a racist presentation or comment, and instead of thinking it isn't our job to take a stand, we realize it is. Julica says, it's my responsibility to interrupt when someone is being harmed and to center their or our needs. It doesn't matter what my hierarchical position is in the system. I'm part of a covenantal community. And when a covenant gets broken, it's my responsibility to name that break with kindness and the intention of healing, and to call us back into right relationship. She admits, though, that to throw a wrench into the agenda is one of the most destabilizing things we can do in majority white spaces, because white supremacy culture teaches us to be efficient, to stay on task, to seek perfection. Julica offers an alternative, to be relational. Instead of staying on task, we can pay attention to what just happened and what needs to be done in order to restore right relationship. We can center those who've been placed at the margins. And she adds, the more privilege we have according to our social location, the more responsibility we have to leverage that privilege. She adds, when we do, we bring the beloved community into being in that moment. May we be observant. May we listen. May we be brave. May we interrupt. May it be so.
We rise,
Humbly hearted.
rise, won't be divided. Rise, with spirit to guide us. Rise, in hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. We rise. All of the children rise.
Elders with wisdom.
Rise. Ancestors surround us. Rise. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. In hope, in prayer, we find ourselves here. In hope, in prayer, we're right here. We rise. Up from the wreckage, rise.
With tears and with courage.
Rise. Fighting for life, rise.
Let's do one more round of Fact or Fiction, Bail edition. Fact or fiction? Unitarian Universalists generally want to help when they see a problem in the world. Fact, of course. I hope and I know that there are some of us out there right now who are asking themselves, what can I do? How can I get involved? And if that's you, you're in luck. There are diverse and growing movements of folks who are committed to address the injustice in our prison systems. One such tactic to address injustice is bailouts for folks who can't afford them. The National Bailout Project says, quote, for them to be successful, for these bailout programs to be successful, they must be a part of a larger campaign to inform, advocate, and organize. With organizing comes more people power and the ability to demand and implement what we want. Bailouts are an opportunity to build with folks who are directly impacted and their families, as well as to encourage our wider community in this issue and to eventually abolish bail money. Right here close to home, our very own UU Justice Arizona is meeting weekly to educate and take action to end bail money. Nationally, you might want to investigate the National Bailout or even the UU Love Resists campaign, who is raising funds this month of May for a national bailout program. Black Lives of UU, BLUU, or BLUE, also sponsors Mother's Day bailouts to bail out women like Ms. Jackson who are incarcerated away from their children, and their children have no one to care for them. But no matter what you do, no matter what you're called to, be sure you learn more, talk with others, and get involved.
Thank you for joining us in worship today, and thank you for any of the past services you've attended in which we explored this proposed eighth principle of Unitarian Universalism. We've explored how this proposed principle fits our spirituality, committed to the worth and dignity of every being, committed to covenantal relationship. And we've explored it as a practice in which we reflect and act again. It is a principle that would call us to continue to grow and change and develop and build that beloved community we so often speak about, a beloved community that might have a chance of being multicultural and diverse, especially if we listen to Black and Indigenous people of color and have them in positions of leadership. So while I might extinguish our chalice, I hope that you leave with thoughts, ideas, maybe even some clarity in the road ahead. And I will leave you with these words taken and only slightly altered from the Reverend Eric Walker Wickstrom. The purpose of this community is to help its people to grow. If you are who you were, and if the person sitting next to you is who they were, if none of us has changed since we came in here, then we have failed. The purpose of this community, of any church, temple, mosque, online gathering, is to help its people to grow. We do this through encounters with the unknown, in ourselves and in one another, in the other, whoever that might be for us, however hard that might be, because these encounters have many gifts to offer. So, may you go forth from here, not who you were, but who you could be. So may we all.